mushroom, that's cremini, red onion, and avocado pizza. And he's going to put some capers on that. And then I have mushroom and baba ganoush on top. And strawberry salad. James is going to talk about P.S. I Love You and True Brit.
Puns for both of them, eh? Peter Sellers, I Love You. Beatles title. But, and also, Angel. Right here.
Yes, she decided she wants to be out all day.
Out all day on the deck.
So I keep trying to. Oh, sorry. I keep trying to convince her to go in because we don't really want her out here alone, and the other dogs don't want to stay out all the time.
No.
You know, because we can kind of use Annafred to guard her. Because I don't think a hawk's going to come down with Annafred.
But yeah, a hawk could take Angel out pretty easily. She's 3.5 pounds. That was before she lost the compete. That was not under our tutelage. She decided to run off.
It happened.
We thought she'd been
old.
taken out by an eagle. Yeah, well, she'd suffered a lot in her wanderings.
She probably would have lost him with us.
It's possible. Didn't happen with Paris. Paris was one in there.
So, I cooked this in the oven without the baba ganoush on top. I spread it on afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think baba ganoush cooked very well, would it?
I mean, it's already, the eggplant's already cooked before it goes in.
Anyway, a couple of books. One's a biography, one's a autobiography. Yeah, True Brit by Britt Eklund. So the commonality between these things is Peter Sellers. So the Peter Sellers book is a biography written by his son, maybe his only son. I don't know how many kids that guy had. But he was you'd think he'd have a sense of humor, but by, I won't say all accounts, but by two accounts, no sense of humor outside of his shows. Great sense of humor, but no sense of ha-ha. It looked as though he was, the term I guess they use now, bipolar, manic depressive, and dangerously so. I think one time it might have been Britt Eklund. It was a pretty small thing. I wouldn't necessarily say he was the biggest critter in the world. It was kind of, I think, like throttling her and saying he was going to kill her. It was kind of like borderline. I'm afraid he was a bit like Phil Spector. Was a very dangerous individual. Like gun, American. Perhaps fortunate. Sellers was not raised around guns. And didn't have them available. Anyway, Phil Spector eventually killed someone. Probably should have been institutionalized before that. But he was rich, could get away with it. And ever since John Lennon and Geraldo Rivera got on the stick, the fashion has been, and frankly it's a fashion, to not institutionalize the people capers things. Not institutionalize people who are problems for themselves or for others. And, you know, John Lennon might have ended up paying the price. But I should take all of this, right?
Yep. That's why I drained it, so you
There we go. That's good.
go ahead and do that.
I was wondering why it was so dry. Very thoughtful. Thank you. But, you know, like, who knows? The guy that killed Lennon might have been John Lennon. Might have been, if he'd been institutionalized. I don't know if he'd showed enough, shall we say, promise to have warranted institutionalization. Lenin might still be alive today. There's this silly idea out there that insanity is a societal construct or something like that, and that the reason why people commit suicide or whatever is because they're just not accepted by society. How about people who commit homicide, where Phil Spector and Peter Sellers not accepted by society? Peter Sellers, did he win an Academy Award? I don't know if he ever got around to getting one, but he was lionized for being there, was he not? His role in being there. It's considered a classic movie, and it deserves to be considered classic. People loved him.
I think the more popular one would have been Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah, exactly right. He did a great job in that one. He did a great job in front of anything. But, oh yeah.
I prefer being there.
Yeah. So, different kind of pace to those two different movies. Hard to compare. But like Peter Sellers, he was an outcast. No, he wasn't. There was a particular family that kind of loved having him over for tea and crumpets and all this sort of stuff. It was a royal family. It doesn't, in English society, you don't get more accepted than that. Pete Townsend, bipolar, and he was dangerous. I don't think he was nearly as dangerous as Phil Spector. Peter Sellers, much less Phil Spector. Phil Spector, people knew he was just a time bomb. But, like Phil Spector was a millionaire, I think possibly even while he was still a teenager. Got to produce some of the best performers in the world. I think he set his sight on the Beatles. He ended up producing them almost posthumously after the group basically broken up. Got to produce John Lennon, George Harrison, all this sort of stuff. A lot of acceptance, but that didn't seem to help things out. There are some people, nowadays they've got lithium for people who are bipolar or manic depressive. They don't stay on the meds. I don't know. I think they should be not allowed to hang around and endanger other people. Jim Gordon, a drummer for Derek and the Dominos. In other words, Eric Clapton and company. Duane Allman. I remember one rock critic around that time saying Jim Gordon was the hardest hitting rock and roll drummer. Who knows that? But he meant the way he hit the drum skins. Who knows what it was like when it came to people. Jim Gordon was schizophrenic, manic depressed, apparently. He ended up killing, I believe it was one of his parents. Highly accepted. He would have been in demand amongst people. He was something like a studio musician. Played on all sorts of records. He was on George Harrison's All Things Must Pass, along with other drummers. And Ringo Starr played on that album. And There were other drummers who played. I think Jimmy Gordon was on. But he was on all sorts of albums. And that wasn't enough, you know? It's not... People don't act insane because they're you know, like, or dangerous to themselves or to others because of lack of acceptance or stuff like that, because they think different. They have troubles. I have a sister who was schizophrenic. Dead now. She wanted to commit suicide 5 times. And she was institutionalized. And I never got the impression it was a danger to anyone else. But she had auditory hallucinations. And she was scared when she had them. You know, she was not happy. There wasn't a question of her not being accepted or stuff like that. One time she was having an auditory hallucination, just lost control of her bowel function. That's how scared she was. That had nothing to do with acceptance or anything like that. She was just absolutely scared. She was scared about an abusive old guy who'd been hanging around a mission or 2 in Africa, who would have been long dead by the time she was having. He was an old geezer. When she was just a little child. Well, even before she was born, really. She'd never been exposed to his depredations. But somehow or another, she was under the illusion that he was still alive in Canada, threatening her. No. Geraldo Rivera found cases, I think it was someplace, Brookhaven or something like that, in Long Island, New York. Found cases of neglect and abuse. You don't shut down the institution just because there's neglect and abuse. You don't defund something like that. You refund. In other words, you increase the funding. In the cases of neglect, make sure there's more people taking care of people. Mm-hmm. And then you raise standards, in other words, and you prosecute people who are actually doing abuse.
Yeah, because what they ended up doing was just
closing it,
setting the people who needed help out into the world, where, I mean, obviously they're getting neglected. Nobody's caring for them out there. So how does that work?
It doesn't work well. You got people actually threatening people out in the street, killing people who are stuck trying to take care of them, members of the family. It didn't do anyone any good, really, to have Phil Spector out on his own recognizance. Woman ended up paying for society's stupidity. So Pauline points it out. It's just amazing neglect. It's crazy. Anyway, Britt Eklund talks about Peter Sellers. She was married to him for a while. He was one of these guys who'd, get infatuated with a woman, generally stunning looking, and try to bowl her over, not with his, you can see it wasn't great for looks. Could have bowled them over with his incredible talent, but no. He'd fill a room with flowers, cut flowers and stuff like that. Huge gestures. You know, here's a ring or whatever, diamond ring. But then, you know, like, then he'd get paranoid, you know, like, I guess he's thinking, look at me, I'm a schmuck. You know, he finally got himself into shape when he was doing the Clouseau shows, but he used to be kind of fat, weight, and things like that. It's really a sad case. He should have been institutionalized until they found lithium. And, you know, then he should have been put out filming, but not allowed to live with people and abuse them, things like that. A horrible person. That shouldn't be allowed. So, yes, I love you. There's a bit too much, maybe, of the family. Peter Sellers' family from his first wife. I think there was a child from a kind of like an unacknowledged child. I don't know what it is about these guys. Rod Stewart, the same way. Unacknowledged child before he ever got married or stuff like that. And, you know, like, hey, you know, like Rod Stewart's a big, rich idiot, you know, big car fancier, like Peter Sellers, but they can't be, you know, millionaires, multimillionaires, and they can't be bothered to do the right thing by children that they fathered to their own irresponsibility. Well, there are some interesting pictures in here. Here's Spike Milligan, looks like a nice guy. Yeah, your dad liked the Goon Show, right? Or
I do.
not so much. Anyway, I can see him liking. So, big car fancier. So this is a cute picture of Peter Sellers in his big fancy. He's at Rolls Royce, and there's his son in a little toy car.
Oh, that's good.
That's a cute picture. That's Peter Sellers' first wife, of course. He had to get rid of her somehow. Here's a nice picture with him and Cary Grant. But you see what I mean? So he's a little bit fat and whatever. Not Cary Grant, but you know, he's sitting on the. You know, he's got a fancy car, accepted by society. I mean, how many people get to sit on a bumper of a Rolls Royce or a Bentley with Cary Grant? This is early, before he really became famous. Cary Grant, I think, was a Cockney, right, from London. So here he is. Yeah, here he is. This is before he became really famous. So yeah, that was in Rolls Royce in 1959, and it was Peter Sellers Rolls Royce. And then this would be sometime in the 60s. So how many guys have Sophia Loren kind of attracted to them? You know, she finally dumped him for her husband, Carlo Ponti, but for a while they were an item. So how's that for not being accepted? You know, like you think differently and you're not accepted. You know, this is when Sophia Loren was considered, you know, like one of the maybe the hottest item on celluloid, you know. So somehow or another, he's not accepted. Here he is with his mom, you know. He's looking not really dumpy or anything now, but there he's with one of the fanciest starlets going. He didn't like her movie career, you know. Kind of cost her movie career.
Oh, she's
Brit
very
Eklund.
beautiful.
Oh, of course.
Well, you have 10 minutes.
10 minutes. So let's just see about him, more pictures of him and how he's not accepted, you know. Here he is with Liza Minnelli, not quite as posh looking as some of the women that he was hanging with, but she's a big star, you know, and hanging with her. People love him, playing the role of Clouseau. He's looking quite impressive, actually. Here he is with Miranda Quarry. I don't know how much younger she was than him. He's looking pretty, he's in shape here. But she's actually an aristocrat. She comes from an aristocratic family. And how's that for not being accepted? English aristocracy. Fantabulous looking. Here he is. Here's his children hanging with Ringo Starr. This would be about 1969. So how's that for not being accepted? The Beatles were kind of like royalty. Here it is. Here's in his backyard a couple of his cars. So this looks like his Rolls Royce, and this is some fancy sports car. And in between, one of his friends has dropped by, Tommy Sopwith. So probably comes from the Sopwith camel family. He just dropped in his helicopter. So this happens to people who aren't socially accepted. Like they got to they're going to get dropped in by. So I was going to show this Pauline. Here's one of his friends dropping by in his helicopter. Right? So that's like he's got friends who've got helicopters. They're just dropping by. That's what happens when you're not socially accepted. Let's see if we find any pictures in this Britt Ekland thing. So yeah, Britt Ekland, he ends up marrying her for a while. So here she is when she was modeling before she became a movie star. So she was a model as well as a movie star. Here he is hanging out with royalty. This is Tony Snowden. Here he is hanging out. They're wearing glasses. So this is Princess Margaret. This is Queen Elizabeth's sister. I think she might be dead now. So here's Tony Snowden. I think he hung more with Britt Ekland. I don't know. I think it was Tony Snowden had a little trouble keeping his zipper up.
Can you do it?
There he is hanging with
It's hard, hey.
their daughter, Victoria. That's Tony Snowden. That's royalty. So, like royalty's hanging with this guy. So, who are some of the other people that are hanging with him? With her, Britt Ekland. Lou Adler, producer of Mamas and the Papas. Here's I don't know if he was much of an item with Britt Ekland, but she's in a role with Roger Moore, hot-looking guy. She's hanging with Roman Polanski there, not very hot-looking, but big movie producer. She's hanging with Rod Stewart, kind of a freaky-looking guy, but he's a tall guy, and a lot of women went for him and stuff like that. So, Peter Sellers was. I don't think he was, like looked down on by society and rejected and all this sort of stuff. People loved his idiosyncrasies and stuff like that. At least they showed up on screen. And it just didn't help him out, and it didn't help out the folks that he was abusing. He's a horrible, abusive person. So enough for my little rant there. And that's my reviews are. This True Grit thing was put out in 1980. I don't know. I don't know if it's really worth it. P.S. I Love You. It's pretty good. It shows him. If you put the two together, you get a pretty good idea of what he was like. There's slightly different emphases and so on and so forth. Did they come recommended? If you like Peter Sellers, and maybe you should. He's an awesome actor. There you go.